So welcome to Telematic Media Arts. My name is Clark Buckner. I'm the director here. And today we are hosting artist Alicia Escott in conversation with Marthine Satris, associate editor of Heyday. Today's event is presented in conjunction with this exhibition, presented as part of the exhibition, Alicia's exhibition, Metabolic Riffs, Touch Memory, a community-sourced video installation bridging the human-non-human divide. And I'm going to more formally still introduce our presenters today. So Marthine Satris is the associate publisher at Heyday, the Berkeley-based nonprofit nonfiction press dedicated to stories and books about California's history, natural world, culture, and peoples. Her own writing has been published in the San Francisco Chronicle, Flyway Journal, Contemporary Literature, and elsewhere. She lives in Oakland. Alicia Escott, in turn, is an interdisciplinary artist based in the land we currently call San Francisco. She practices in solidarity with thinkers across fields, undoing the colonial construct of nature as a thing separated from us and our world. Escott's work is informed by how we each negotiate our day-to-day realities amid an awareness of the overarching specter of climate chaos, mass extinction, and the social unrest this rapid change and unprocessed grief produces. Her work makes space for the unspoken, individual and collective experiences of loss, heartbreak, and grief. They approach these issues with an interstitial practice encompassing writing, drawing, word-making, painting, photography, video, sculpture, social practice, composting, seed planting, and activism. So, Alicia and Marthine.
I also just want to quickly, these are my new reading glasses, it's a new thing for me. Thank you, Martina, for being here. I'm really so grateful. And I also want to thank Telematic for hosting this work in this space. I feel like this is a very unique curatorial niche that they're doing here. And I just want to I'm so grateful to be here. And it feels like a very different approach than a lot of other places in the city. I've known Clark for a long time, and showing here feels very special. I also want to say the origins of this work go back, and we might get into that or not. But specifically over the last year, I want to thank the San Francisco Arts Commission, who made this work possible through funding. And just in that, think about the importance of local governmental funding right now in this moment of uncanniness. It's actually really interesting, Clark, when you were reading my bio, I was thinking about how I wrote that so many years ago about the social and political unrest that climate crisis will and has, and it's more and more meaningful. I also want to thank Far Out West Community Dune Garden, which was started by Georgia Hodges, who's an artist and architect and urban water specialist, Doug Jacuzzi, as well as the San Francisco Surfrider chapter, and specifically their ocean-friendly gardens programs. I was so grateful to work with Jane Liu and Marley Slangson. The plant sculptures in this show were all started a year ago in a community workshop with them and many others, where we talked about the dune ecology and the power of the seeds and the history of the land out in the outer sunset. I also want to thank Mia Pixley and Sammy Freeman, who played music to the plants when these were their actual plants out on the Great Highway on the solstice, and Jennifer Perifilino, Movement Works, and dancers Irene She and Shireen D. Ryan, who responded to the plants and the ecology. I want to thank everybody who attended that workshop or reached out to the plants in what would eventually become these videos, and I want to thank the plants themselves for their work of living. So, just some thoughts.
I just, thinking about the ideas that are at play here, they're all the things I want to always be thinking about, so I'm really grateful and glad I get to do that with you today. And I wanted to start by just, let's go into a little bit the origin of this work. I've been following your work and getting to know it and talking about it with you over a few years now. So can you tell us a little bit more about the origin of this show and particularly the title Metabolic Riffs Touch Memory?
Do you want the long or the short?
I think long.
Long?
Yeah.
Okay. So this work goes back actually probably to around the time when Trump was first kind of rearing his head on the scene, and maybe a little bit before that. Actually, when I was first, my studio is out by Ocean Beach, where this work is really grounded in. And at 48th and Kirkham, so really out there, we actually have a reproduction of a painting from 100 years ago as well, if you guys want to see the dune ecology later. But when I started making that work, or when I had my studio in there, I really wanted, I've always found residencies really generative. And I started thinking about having my studio there as its own residency. And so I started doing research on that land. And I was like an hour into that research, like I just made this commitment. And I realized the first documented butterfly extinction in North America had occurred in the outer sunset, in those dunes, not that long ago when they were paved over. And it was just like this further reminder that sort of ghosts my work is so much about are all around us. And so I made all this work that ended up in a show at YBCA where I had this shipping and receiving department for this fake, which was a real Amazon web store where you could buy part of A Brief History of the Sunset. Anyhow, that was a whole long project that I won't get into. But the whole time that I was working on that project, I was thinking about this butterfly and about loss. And a lot of people were like, oh, is this the mission blue butterfly? And I was like, no, loss,
The mission blue is endangered, but the Xerxes that you're talking about is
so that's the Xerxes blue butterfly is an extinct butterfly. The Xerxes and the mission blue is a butterfly that we still have that's endangered. And so I had this sort of refusal around that, and then fast forward a couple years, and this is around the time that before and around when Trump was elected the first time. And I realized I was more interested in talking about what we still had than about loss, which had been the subject of my work for a long time. And at the time I was also just like seed saving and learning about seeds and growing from seeds, and I was really I was really just so I was like thinking about that, and I was kind of procrastinating being in my studio and just riding my bike around and throwing seeds everywhere and thinking about that, and I didn't know how that it would come into the work. And then I had a show out by Irving Street Projects, and it started this like ongoing thinking about a field guide of the outer sunset and what we still have. And I started growing silverleaf lupin, which is the host plant for the mission blue butterfly. And that, and so the first time I shoved one of these reclaimed bags full of compost to figure out how to integrate those alongside drawings that I was making of the mission blue and other pollinators. And I stuffed it and I was like, oh, this is really weird. This is good. And at the time I got nervous that I was going to get a review where somebody was like, oh, these poop-like bags. Talking about how they kind of look like shit. I never got that review.
Okay.
But I was like really prepared to talk about it because I was thinking about metabolic rifts, and this goes to I'm actually coming around to answer your question, is a reference to Karl Marx's talking about the rupture I think he's specifically thinking about industrial agriculture, but at large, just the way that we've so divorced ourselves from nature that like we sit on white pedestals and our, shit just like goes away and we never have to see it again. And same with our bodies don't return to the land. So that metabolic, that energetic cycle has been ruptured, and there's this rift, and that's the metabolic rift that he's referencing. So that is where that word came from, and those sculptures began that way. And I could talk more about that, but I feel like I should take a break for a second. But the touch memory part of that is that these are living beings and they're sort of part of the artwork, but I think in a lot of my work there's like, what is the work? So this work being none of it being living, it was sort of at the last minute that we added some of the plants, and they're intended to be less looked at and just as much like looking at themselves and sort of subjects. And so touch memory is this reference to like how so much of our experience of nature is so mediated through these phones and like disembodied from that actual work.
I love that your work goes in so many different directions and pulls on so many different mediums. I have so many questions, but one of the things I've always loved about how you talk about this work, especially with the sculptures, is about making art for a non-human audience. That was one of the first things I think you ever said to me when we were at the Brower Center, and I was looking at that had some of the phones, some of these kind of a little seedling of this show, and I think I love that even now, even this show, you're making art for these non-human audiences.
Thank you. Yeah. And are you?
Go ahead. Yeah. So just speak.
I just talked a lot.
I can say more. One of the things I think is also interesting is we're kind of commenting, coming out of this weather that is so ocean beachy out there, like this wind and fog, into this like enclosed space that is intentionally separated from the outside, and yet it's still poking through. I wondered what it's been like to instantiate something that is such a place-based art practice on the other side of the city. Does it feel like you're drawing a line and a web, or does it feel like this is focused more on that mediated, framed, boxed up experience of nature?
I think it's an and. And I'll also just go back when you were saying like making art for non-human audiences. I think that actually gets to sort of what I was just talking about in sort of a continuation of that. Like after I started growing these sculptures, which I'd been doing for several years, and they were within installations, and that was sort of like what they were started for. And I had started my most ambitious versions of them 2019, rainy season 2019 for a show that was going to open 2020 that didn't open on schedule, right? And so and you guys feel free to grab chairs if you change your mind. And so obviously that show didn't happen on schedule, and I decided they bloomed in my backyard. And all these pollinators came that I had never recognized there, both the backyard at my studio by Ocean Beach and my home. And I was like, oh, this is perfect. This is the audience. This is who I want to be making this work for. So that was like really embodied, and like it was this huge breakthrough. But then I was like, I still have to be an artist with a capital A and get that like cultural capital from them. So I started taking photos of them, kind of interacting, and then started with the videos. And that just kind of happened one day as I was taking the photographs, and something really bizarre kind of happened as I was editing that, where I felt like the plants reached back out to me. And as I started doing more of them, that would like happen more and more in person. There was sort of this like energetic thing that happened. And so that, just going back to the non-human audiences, but this work being sort of based by Ocean Beach and then here, I was really interested. So just so you guys know, all of this, like I think I mentioned in the intro, these were started at a community garden where folks were stuffing the bags with compost and soil and in big groups and learning about dune ecology plants and nature. A lot of these, like some of these videos, I brought the plants to Surfrider beach cleanups and invited people to reach their hand out to the plants to think about how we can think about restoring just as we're thinking about cleaning up. And so it's very, 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 it was like a year of very, very embodied work, and it's really grounded in the outer sunset. I also, behind my studio, a building was taken down around that time, and it opened up a bunch of sands that didn't have any weed seed. And so I put down, dune ecology, and like this whole dune meadow came up, like really, because there wasn't the weed there, really incredibly. Actually, there's like a 2-year-old silverleaf lupin now growing there, which is the host plant for that mission blue butterfly that we were talking about initially. So it's very grounded in that work, but I really also want to, my friend Susan Chen, when she first came in here, she was like, oh, this is so different. And she was thinking about how she's somebody who's made a lot of work about nature, and she thought she really liked nature, but she'd grown up in an urban situation, and she was like, oh, I like nature the way David Attenborough talks about nature. And I think that's like a lot of what our experience of it is. So I wanted this to feel like experiential and emotive, but like be really thinking about this separation. And then I am so site specific that I was really inspired. There's like this little piece of vine in a door back here that's going over a door, and if you walk out, there's a piece of wire coming out of the building. So it's very much also thinking about Soma and this land, which also was a dune and a marsh. And actually some of the sidewalk got taken up just recently, and you could see just the sand and the, chert soil underneath there. So definitely I think the way that the installation came together is very much grounded in here. As we've mentioned, we're doing a walking tour of the sidewalks there, but these places wouldn't have been as disconnected, historically as they have been.
Well, and that, I just love that in these moments you get this sort of, everything feels so hard and permanent here, and yet it's just like this scrim across the land that is still present and shaping the landscape, the like built landscape that we also are experiencing. And it's the ghosts are still flowing as creeks underneath us, and the seed banks were laid down. Right? Wasn't there? There was like a rare. I forget what plant it was. Was it a ceanothus or no? It was a manzanita that just like bloomed somewhere when they were doing some like.
Oh yeah, the one that they found in the Presidio.
Yeah.
The Franciscan manzanita.
Yeah.
They was like excavating for the highway, and then one of the plant specialists.
Yeah.
I forget the name for that.
That's a Francisco
They
manzanita.
were like, I've never seen this before.
Yeah.
Like, what is this? And then it was really healthy.
Yeah.
You know, a native plant that they thought had gone extinct. They were like, no, it was just hiding from the rest of us.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah. I know all these little things hidden.
Yeah, out by my studio at some point in time when I was working on this work, I was like feeling down about it. I think I was like getting things organized for the musicians or something, but I was having I've been spending a lot of time just like watering, you know, like this work requires a lot of care. And so I went out there and all of a sudden this like blue caught my eye. And it was like a tiny blue butterfly, and I'm also I don't have it here, but I'm also growing the host plant to the extinct Xerces blue butterfly, and then of course the mission blue butterfly, and so I see this like blue and then it like stopped, and I could really look at it, and I was like, oh my god, I'm not making this up. This is really happening. And then I later on looked, and its dots were a little bit more organized. Than the Xerces or the Mission Blue would have been, or than the Mission Blue would have been, but we think it was this silvery blue, which also then Jane was telling me that that's what they're kind of procreating to try and like fill the niche habitat of the Xerces blue, which is separate from the Mission blue. So it's like you build it, they will come.
Yeah, they're like, we've been waiting for you to do that work, to do that care work that it takes. One of the to shift things just a little bit, one of the experience for me of participating in one of these videos was just wonderful, and it was so, I also felt taken care of because you were sharing flowers that I loved with me that you had grown, the lupins and the poppies, and then I also got to meet lots of new plants that I hadn't known before, and then and as you were talking about when you did the concert and the dancing, you had the plant bodies out there and people carried them, and I just would love for you to talk a little bit about these sculptures as bodies, as communities, and as something we care for.
Yeah. Before we do that, can I also just say like what that was like, because it is a different experience, right? Like to be out there messy in the white, which several people here have done, outside, and then seeing the work here. Is it, I don't know, I'm curious your...
Yeah. Well, the day that I was at your studio in the backyard, I had only seen your work in studio or gallery settings before. So to be a part of the process was awesome and different because it was hot. Remember how hot it was?
Yeah.
And that was strange in Ocean Beach area. And then to have all these different kind of plant bodies and to choose which ones came in, and some were little and some were big and some had been seeded for a year or two. And then there was the creating the framed work with the paper, and then the dirt would spill, and we were kind of trying to clean the dirt off and positioning myself, and you were directing me, and I was following this slow flow, kind of Tai Chi level of slowness of movement, but then also just finding what I was naturally drawn to touching. And what I love about lupin in particular, we don't have to talk about lupin the whole time, but I do love it, is
we're going to talk about lupin.
It's lupin time.
Is that the leaves are palmate, and so to me they're just these little hands that are always reaching out already, and so being able to like reach to them and back to them, and to hear you talk about how like it's not just the wind moving it, but there's this like sense of mutual reaching that has happened really it was a different way to relate to the plants, and I really liked it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean that's been so interesting because like I'm bringing these to beach cleanups, and like people are like, you want me to talk to the plant? I'm like, yeah.
It's a little awkward. Let's give it a shot.
and then I do think it's kind of special because it does have that white behind it, and people are like focusing on this plant in a way that's very concentrated, and sometimes I'm like, this is like this Marina Abramovich, like the artist is like, I feel like exhausted after that, you know what I mean? There's like this focus that I think happens with that listening on a different scale. But I do want to get back to your question about like these plant bodies, and also like how that is to like me caring for them a lot and then bringing them to those situations, and how much that can like be about consent. Like there's some times where I'm like anxious, where I feel like somebody's being too but I also want them to have their own, like if they feel like they have that agency with that plant to do that, I don't want to take that away from them. It was really interesting. I like really felt that when I did this with my parents. Like both my mom and my dad, which I have very different separate relationships with. My dad's hands in that hanging area. Just that like feeling. And so yeah, they're very like embodied. This year they were also a lot smaller, so they're like kind of baby-like, and the way they sort of have this kind of personhood, and their that shape allows them to sort of be an individual, but they're also like they're grown from seeds, and I don't really like micromanage the seeds that much. There are times where I want like a specific a specific plant that has to do with a specific pollinator, like deerweed for the Xerces blue, or for the the Xerces blue, or silverleaf for the mission blue. So I'm trying to cultivate that, but really I sort of like throw the seeds down and let them work out their own community there. And then there are certain years, like this plant, you can see in that video from a year ago, like they have different generations. And so they're like little ecologies, but they're also little people. And then they're also like, they have a lot of agency in this work. Like when I first started showing this work, I was really interested in like the tubes of plastic and the like soil, and this little sprout of green that talked about like some little hint of possibility and regeneration amid this sort of like apocalyptic narrative. And then they like actually thrived in these sort of like greenhouse environments, and then they like started blooming, and I was like, no, it's like way too pretty. And I was like, I already make work about animals and about like then butterflies, and you know what I mean? Like these things just keep like but like that's what they want. They want to bloom. Like that's what they want out of the collaboration, and like I had to respect that. And specifically, you were referencing that that event on the Great Highway where Mia Pixley and Sammy Friedman were playing music to the plants, and the dancers were responding to the plants. And I originally really didn't want to invite anybody to that. I wanted it to be like literally they're playing music to the plants. And it's at Great Highway, so people are gonna see it. But I like didn't want to invite people. But then it was like Sammy Friedman, and the dancers are so incredible. You know what I mean? So I like wanted to support. So we invited a lot of people, and there were a lot of people there. And then it was so cold. It was so it was just like classic Ocean Beach, you know?
In June.
Oh my God. And so all the little, like you can see in that one where the poppies closed up. Like a lot of the blooms were closing up, and they weren't fully. I thought that they'd be over bloomed by that time, but they were they weren't, and it became like much more somber than I anticipated it to be. The whole event, and there were like pelicans going by, and then at the end of it, everybody stayed for like 2 hours in this freezing cold. And then I was like, okay, well, you can see more of them blooming at my studio at this like dune meadow. So let's all like grab a plant and let's walk in procession and go over there. And I was thinking that would be just like this cute thing. But then it's like everybody just showed up and started carrying them, and then coming back and grabbing the pedestals and doing, and like really coming together as a community. And it was like so amazing. Like I was so blown away. And it's always like, of course, the human community always trumps at the end of the day, right? But the plants just got kind of slumped to the side. And I was like, oh my God, like the plants. And so, I was exhausted the next couple of days. And by the time a couple of days later when I got back, I like rushed to go see them. I was like really worried because they get slumped, and I was like, I'm just using them for my own art career. And then I get there and they were all blooming. You know what I mean? Like they hadn't been 2 days later, but and I was like, oh, you guys appreciated this, and I had other experiences also where like they hadn't, when I first was like, oh, I want to make them about non-human communities, and then I was only going to do, then I put them outside at USF on their roof gallery, thinking, oh, this will be perfect. And then they like really never took off that year. I think the compost was too rich, but I also was like, oh, you guys don't want to perform, so they have their own like agency. So the fact that they're here with us today is a good sign.
And yes, and I also really love that we get to see these other aspects of the plants that you've brought in here. Like what plant is this the root of here?
That I believe is Globegilia. Okay. It might be Clarkia, but I think it was really, really tall Globegilia, and it has pretty shallow roots. Yeah, and we've got some purple needlegrass and others.
And one of the things I really liked learning about the different presentations of the screens from you is about the materiality of that. And one of the things I love about your work is that you're always kind of trying to refuse a binary and help us see the way that we relate to nature, even through the making of things that are metal or made of wood. And thinking about this as a space dedicated to media and video, I wondered if you could discuss kind of the process of how you source the screens and the technology and share, and how you're sharing it here.
Yeah, well, that's part of why I was so, aside from just like really loving the curation here and all that stuff, I was really excited about the possibility of showing here, was because Clark has existing screens, and I did end up buying things, but I really do try to not, just use existing materials and like, so thinking about that, and a lot of these are quite old. We realized the other day, because that computer stopped working, which it was an easy fix, but it was from 2009, so thinking about these generations, and just like the generations of plants, the generations of technology, thinking about the way that energy moves through these wires in the same way that energy, moves through roots and branches and mycelium, not really separating those, because like that's part of nature, right? And we're often mimicking those things. I mean, it's not, and we could talk more about that. but it's not because we haven't let it yet, you know? And so, and we're image makers. Like, we believe images. I mean, I think that that's so fundamental to being human. And so the fact that, like, this feels soothing to us is still real, even if it's not real.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
The neurotransmitters are still real.
Yeah. And that's like a quandary.
No, I love the elements of confusion that you introduce here of, like, am I looking at something organic or not when we have all these different things twining together? And that goes to what you're doing with the screens too. Like, are we looking at something real or not? Am I engaging with nature or not? When we have these, you know, vertical screens that are as we're kind of constantly encountering nature as on our phones in particular.
Yeah. And the way that, like, I think it's a self-soothing device for living through mass extinction. The fact that, like, we are image makers, and at the same time that we are losing species at a rapid clip that is probably considered on the rate of, like, major mass extinction events, we're proliferating images of them and writing about them and ideas of them, and that we can just, like, see a rhino on our phone at any time. You know what I mean? And the way that those ghosts live all around us through advertising and through, you know, the California flag and through, you know, like the way that we proliferate, it's like another form of reproduction, right?
And I think the other aspect of the phone that we were discussing a little bit is also that it's this, you know, when I think back to the touch memory and those keywords, there's kind of two aspects of that, is that we're always touching our phone, and it's also a memory device. It's something we use to kind of extend our memory and to share our memories. And so when you're making these videos, are you also thinking about holding these moments in time, creating kind of a extended memory?
I mean, I think we're all, like, afraid of death, right? And we're always trying, you know, like, and that, I mean, I think I would love to hear you, because you were just earlier talking about the Cianantha, so I'd rather hear you.
I can talk about that.
I'm talking about that, but yeah, absolutely. The way that we're like extending things, the way we you know, that we don't want our bodies to decompose, that we want to, like, be remembered, that we want, instead of, like, being composted and that being a memory of energy that goes through things. I mean, I think we're, like, obsessively, yeah.
We're riffing now on, like, a different conversation what we had, but you shared with me that you always wanted to be composted.
Oh yeah. I have very strong feelings. Everybody in here is witness. Like, if I die, I have always, and I know it's now possible, but, like, wanted either a natural burial or to be composted. That has always felt very important. And I have weird things, like, my partner gets mad at me because I'll, like, take my hair and throw it in the compost. You know what I mean? I'm really have weird.
I don't think that's
weird things about me.
I like that. I mean, that's that reciprocity in relationship that we all are, you know, can make happen just a little bit more.
Yeah.
Of reconnecting with soil and giving of ourselves to it as well. I'll just say, I was thinking about ceanothus. I have a gorgeous blooming ceanothus in front of my house that's been one of the few things that I've really kept alive well, and it's doing phenomenally. I saw all kinds of insects on it, and then I go and I smell it every day, and now the blooms are already starting to fall off. It's already starting to end that part of its cycle. And I get so much pleasure from it at so many levels, and so all I've been doing is taking, like, photographs and videos and smelling it and making my children smell it and just trying to, because scent is one of those memory, like, triggers. So that's one of those are moments, but it also relates. I have this kind of, I'm trying to make a little practice with this gorgeous Phacelia plant that I was growing last year, of recognizing that the flowers are not for me. I'm very incidental to them. And like you said, like the plants want to bloom, and not just to bloom, but to set seed, right?
Yeah.
And they don't care if they die at that point. They've already done their work.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we don't know what they, but like, yes. Yeah, and that's such a weird thing about us, that we like we want to stay here in all these ways,
And that's, and we want the flowers to stay and stay and stay, and they just are one part. There's I don't know if I've showed it to you, the Cold Canyon Fire Journals, which was the observation of regrowth after fire. One of the lines that always stayed with me that Robin wrote in that is that what you can see above ground is not the plant necessarily. It's the roots, the burls. That to the plant is what they are. Like they can get cut off and they'll come back, which is really kind of another ghost that is in our landscape. Even if we can't see it, it's still there. One of the things I was thinking about with memory as we were discussing the show the other week was about the people who were present in here and how you chose who's featured and these moments. I didn't know if you wanted to point anything point us towards anything.
Lots of moments here. And I will say, like, I didn't choose elegantly. I probably have 50 of these videos, and I'm not a video artist, and I don't have great equipment. And so I was like editing them, and then I wasn't sure how much I wanted to just focus on these moments where the plant sort of reaches out in reciprocity, or how much I wanted more like fallow moments, and how much I wanted them to integrate. And I mean, I think I could have had a whole other show with other videos that I didn't show. I don't know if it was because we were installing in like January, February, or if it's just my like aesthetic or what have you, but like I didn't show a lot of like bloom. I pulled that back a lot. And there was definitely like the aesthetics of folks, but also just these moments that happened. There were also like certain technology. My camera broke, and my camera was just like a digital SLR from 12 years ago that I was working with. Like I was using very lo-fi equipment, and that broke. So some of these were borrowed cameras and rented cameras that I didn't know how to use necessarily. So some of them have better quality. But I do want to just like name out a couple people. So that's Dorian Monroe over there, who's been writing about seeds and curating about plants. He has this great line, a seed cracks open before it blooms, and then similar, that small one over there, that's Jeremiah Barber, who is a large person. That's actually a very large plant in there. And he wrote how sort of not being guided on what to do, and like just being like told to reach out to the flower. He was like, oh, I felt like when you're in conversation with certain delicate people, you know what I mean? That you're like trying to cultivate. And then Jen Batar, who's talked about before, like one time went to go touch a tree, and she felt like the tree told her not to, This one's looping through, but those were all at a beach cleanup, so it's a lot of different people at those ones. So that was like very much in like a, outside in community, really like awkward. These were really like awkward workshops sometimes.
Which makes sense, right? Because it's like getting over estrangement. Like it's going to be awkward when you try to reestablish relationship and repair.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would love for you to speak a little more about the aesthetics, about trying to kind of refuse a prettiness at the same time as you're also thinking about trying to show us possibility and what we still have, and not just the apocalyptic nature. So I just would love, as an artist, to think about like what when you're trying to present something that's kind of making an argument and trying to stimulate thinking in us, like how you play with beauty and our relationship with flowers.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I can do it any other way than I can do it. Like, I definitely have this refusal, and then it always comes like smacking. Like, it's just like we're like, oh, you don't want to talk about butterflies? We're gonna like situate you where the first documented butterfly extinction happened. But also, like, when we talk about the first documented butterfly extinction, the Xerces blue, they also think there was a related ant.
Yes.
That lived in symbiosis with said butterfly, and that likely also went extinct, and we're not talking about the ant, we're talking about the butterfly. You know what I mean? So, like, how do we, you have that, and I've always in my work wanted to have like multiple entry points for multiple audiences, and so I feel like that's a way to like talk about the ants, and ants are like huge,
Yeah. I've been working, as you know, on this butterfly book by Liam O'Brien that'll be out next year, or end of this year, October. And yeah, I just was learning a couple weeks before we spoke about the ants' role in cultivating the caterpillars and nurturing the caterpillars on these plants. Which is, they are little caretakers of
farmers.
Farmers. When one of the other aspects that, when you think about kind of dune ecology, I know that has been an active part of your work of thinking about our relationship with our coast, but then one of the largest screens over here, and also thinking about prettiness, so just behind Heyday there.
Which is Jane. Jane's here.
Oh, and that's your hands too.
Oh, cool.
And I remember you were saying, I'm just going to shift this way a little bit. So this has a big red European poppy.
Yeah.
And that is both, flashy and beautiful, and also non-native.
Yeah.
And so I love how you let chance also drive your work and are open to sort of possibilities. So when you saw what happened to be growing there, what did you think? How did that make its way into this show?
Yeah. So and again, I didn't show a lot of like the blooming. There was like a lot of beauty that happened in this project, and then like of course the biggest one is the Also keep in mind, like I'm just doing these on the fly outside. There's wind. There's all these forces. There's like the creep of shadows. There's all these things. There's like only so much room. So I don't have entire control, but I do think it's really interesting that the most prominent flower is the non-native one, and this is all about native California plants and mostly dune ecology ones. But yeah, so I and Lisa, who's in this one, whose hand is in this one, she is a neighbor at my studio. Who lives in one of those buildings, and so also works in the backyard. It's a very shared space, and got excited also, and so was planting things. And then I told her I'd put out wildflower seeds, and she also did, but she didn't know to to specifically get California ones. She thought she was, but I think a lot of people, I certainly came to this work and understanding an embodied way of just like learning from the plants, and she's in that process. And so she'd gotten a mixed wildflower seeds that one of those ones that has both California natives and non-natives that lived here, and she had them in these little like pots where they weren't gonna thrive, but Renee and I had also put some in pots, and so anyhow, one of these pots had fallen over, and I was having anxiety that these weren't going to be like blooming in time or what have you. And so I got this big bag that was, I didn't have very many of the big ones this year. And I was really happy to get this, so I like put it full. and then that was blooming, and I probably knew it was hers, but I like didn't. But I was like, oh, I think that's one of the ones that me and Renee put in. So I think I was like setting my, because I like if I ever lie or like do something wrong, it always comes back to me. I feel like I just can never. So anyhow, I put that into one, planted those into one side to give them a little head start, and then threw the seeds on the other side. And then this like glorious European poppy, comes out, and there it is,
I love that. So it's like that one is a record, a living record of somebody else's relationship with plants in place.
Yeah, and also it's like I'm cultivating these native, and this I feel like we probably should not get too far into this because we could talk about this forever, but like. And I'm sure folks are getting anxious, but like also like it is also, I've done a lot of work around what is good about that and think, using ecology as a metaphor to talk about gentrification and all these things, but also like who are we to say? You know what I mean? Like who, and it's a lot of judgment calls. I mean, California is a very special place. It is like an ecological island because, some very specific things evolved here that can only live here, you know what I mean? But also like, we're also a metropolitan place that is welcoming of other people. And so this like, yeah.
I love that.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I was not raising my hand. I was just trying to move my hair.
Yeah, but it's perfect because you've just made a show on this subject matter, and you and I have talked quite a bit about this. So if you wanted to,
I wanted you to talk about. So, how do I say? I wanted you to talk about control because I'm going to say this in a way that is with all the love in my heart, but I feel like you have this like sort of chaos that sort of you're presenting in this way, or like this thing that is imitating wildness, but then I also know that there is like a great deal of control in just both the artwork and the making of it. So how do you find the balance?
Yeah, I think it's it's a good question. And I think you and I both have this like minimalist, maximalist, like, and there's this wrestle constantly with figuring that out. And, I wasn't sure, like, there's some points where the wires become part of the work, and there were moments where I was like, oh yeah, I want, like, lots of that, but there are lots of wires hidden between those. Uma did a really amazing job of, like, hiding a lot of wires and things, and, so that tension of, like, yeah, and then I'm like, it's too much, and, it's a back and forth constantly and continuously, and trying to have like moments of like cluster. Like I was really excited about this area and that area. It was very minimal here, and then Clark was like, it kind of looks empty when you walk in, and then so more of the sculptures came in, and I think that was probably like great, but it's a tension. I don't know. Does that answer your question?
It totally does.
Okay. Let's invite other questions, thoughts, shared your experiences. I know I see one of my friends who's very interested in foraging with both native and non-native things, and a lot of what you were saying about consent reminded me of some of the language around gathering and foraging that I've heard. I don't know if that's part of your practice, Alyssa, or how that works for you.
With consent and gathering, I think a lot of it has to do with species histories and having a familiarity versus having some kind of hierarchical position when you meet something. And so when it comes to being humbled or trying to make sure to humble yourself when you're approaching something, to understand its history and understand that what you might be extracting from.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. And also just to highlight, Renee just had to leave to take care of a living being. But Renee and I and Cheryl Meeker and others also have an oak ecology meadow. I don't think habitat restoration is the right word, because I don't know that, but we're cultivating a healthful oak meadow within a public park that we somehow skirted bureaucracy. And I feel like that, to me, like it's really important to like have the dune meadow happening outside. And I've spent a lot of time in the last few years just like watering and weeding and planting and caring on public lands. That feels like the work I have to do to like do this work. Like that feels part of the consent to me too. And that's like this other side of that.
Right. Because if we step into something and we make decisions or we make actions and we're not aware of the histories, and we could have, it's a common theme, I think, especially with different excitements about, like if you look at the fires that just happened in Southern California, there's a lot of people who are really excited about remediation and how can we help repair, but without having that sort of familiarity or research or expertise, the excitement can come with good intention, but we have to meet that humbleness too, because the good intention can also have negative impact. And so having that mindfulness of, specific locations and their specific ecological niches and so on.
And learning and listening over time.
Yes,
That's
exactly.
huge. Seasonalities, years, and it's like getting to know an environment is like getting to know a human in a lot of different ways. And I think it's also important with the way that we interact with it. So that we can challenge the way that our egos may approach environments.
I think what you're saying, that's something I think, watching something over time and watching it change. I had this moment early in the pandemic when I was on maternity leave with my little infant, and I was sitting every day next to our oak tree, and I was like, I had lived there already 5 years, and I finally realized that it's not just the same all the time. It flowers, it puts out new leaves. There's times when different birds come through, and it was this moment of just constant, steady observation over time to get to know an individual organism. Yeah, it was really lovely.
Yeah, and it's amazing how you think you know those things, and then you're like, I missed this whole thing,
Yeah. So many times we're interacting with our idea of something instead of trying to being able to peel that back.
Yeah. And that's also just working with the seeds.
Yeah.
As I feel like I kind of don't want to know the language, the words for things initially. And then I learn them, and I learn how they look like as sprouts and and then later on. But then I think it's important to learn the names of things. You know what I mean? We have to have both, but I don't want one or the other.
Hi, this has been such a beautiful conversation. I love listening to you and learning. My question is about scale and how whether or not it's intentional, which videos are small and which videos are larger, and how that does and doesn't relate to the actual size of both the plant, and also just interesting is human hands, because human hands is one of those things that it's very difficult to tell how big a person is. Unless it's obviously a small child's hand, most adult hands, I'm I don't know how tall that person is. Right? I don't actually know which of these are small, which of these are large, and this is also a bit of a comment, because you said we were welcoming comments. I was at home this morning, and then I saw a whole bunch of keepers, and some kefir, and I came in here, and I was there's a little bit of feeling of I just walked into an Ensom kefir experience, because he's talking about memory and war and destruction and the things that humans write on each other, and then using plants to make as part of that, plants, and with all of the different meanings. But the plants in his works are dried; they are no longer living. Whereas here, your plants are living; they are growing. There are generations within each bag. I just was curious then, like a follow-up question for me was like, how do you think about letting go when it comes to these plans? So that's like two questions.
Yeah.
One about scale and one about letting go.
Yeah. Well, the letting go is weird because also these are in plastic. They're reclaimed plastic. I am definitely an artist, and I'm not saying all artists need or should do this, but I definitely am like obsessive about like my impact in my work. You know what I mean? A shout out to the gallery. Actually, these plastic cups, they're so amazing. Clark washes them. Isn't that so cool? Like these little moments that we can have, that we can, but you know, so the plastic on these, and I've been making work about plastic for a very, very long time, and I have a lot of thoughts around plastic, but like the plastic industry is so bad, and you know, I think there's the potential that we're looking at the tobacco industry in the 50s, you know, like they're lying to our face.
Yeah.
And so part of what happens with these when the letting go happens, and I usually reclaim the soil and stuff, but I like to see them like break apart a little bit, but that means that the plastic, because they're in the sun, breaks apart. It doesn't molecularly break down, and I think that that's important. Plastic has been molecularly altered and does not molecularly break down, but all of those plasticizers they're adding to it breaks down, so it gets brittle, which has to do with my own work because I've made like very detailed drawings on plastic that also, you know, and so that's about my own loss, and you know, like it's never been a concern of mine that the work's archival because I feel like we're gonna have landfills that will tell our stories, and I don't think our art's what's going to survive us. I think it's our, like, we're building museums to our garbage essentially in landfills. So yeah, I mean, I think a lot about death, and I love that you were saying that because I think there's a lot of violence in this work and a lot of like what can grow, and we were just talking about the European poppy, which is a symbol of that.
And then on the question of scale, which comes back to, I know you were mentioning earlier that the quality of video was one constraint that you were working with. Was there other decisions?
Definitely, I was like, it felt really wrong to me if they became larger than life. That became like monument, like that just became a different dialogue that I wasn't very comfortable with, and scale's really important in my work. I make a lot of drawings of species that have been displaced from places that they are signifiers of, and those are all to scale of the actual animal.
And the acorns and everything.
Yeah, like so scale's always important to me. So yeah, the ones that are big, and Dorian, his hand is probably bigger than that hand. He's a big guy. Jeremiah is. But some of the little ones are some of my favorites too, and I'm being sort of like subtle in like inviting the viewer, but I wanted to think about also like scale and experience with them. I was so excited. This was my first time having big screens to show these on. And that was so exciting to me, but also then like there was another one that was available and we pulled that because it seemed like too much. But yeah, and I thought a lot of, I don't know if I'm answering very
it feels very thoughtful. It doesn't feel random. It feels like there's, whether like fully intentional, it feels intentional, like I don't, like maybe there's a story there with the scale that you are also still figuring out, right?
Yeah.
Because it sounds like some of these presentation materials are new and different, and you're like experimenting with them.
Yeah, I like them big though. Yeah.
We even explored projecting it wall size, right? Yeah, we had very large.
Yeah. And I actually remember feeling like my arms were too short when I was, because we were trying to figure out like how I could reach them without my body
Videos
being
were
there.
so good. It was just my camera wasn't that good on that day. But Martina's hand is in the postcard image,
Yeah.
which, by the way, Uma Dasso Tool actually put together the postcard image with taking 3 of the works.
Yeah, that was a really cool collage.
Yeah, which was also great because it included a lot of blooming.
Yeah.
And I was like I couldn't
Do
like,
it.
pull it back. So it was so perfect.
I really do love that there are so many artists who work with nature and plants, and also some of the people who have like walked me through and taught me art here, like with Kijun judging and Leslie, and so I really appreciate that because I come much more from the plant side of things, and it's really fun to hear other kinds of conversations that we can also have and explore. So I invite you guys, if there are other little threads or rootlets that you want to pull on to join in.
Yeah, there's so much talent in this room.
I have a question. This is beautiful. It's really affecting to sit here and to sit here for so long. It just kind of, I feel like I'm absorbing it in this really interesting way. And something that struck me about your conversation was early on, you mentioned that these plants were like looking at themselves, the way we would go and look at like a portrait, of a human. And it anthropomorphizes them in such a way that reflects the way that you've talked about them. And I interact with a lot of scientists they very much bristle at the idea of anthropomorphizing plants. So I wanted to get your take on that. And I also, because I work with literary translation too, I'm thinking about maybe anthropomorphizing plants in the language that we use to talk about them is a way of trying to translate their language into something that we can empathize with or understand in the same way that like translating a foreign language into English would help us understand a literary piece.
Oh my God, there's so much there. I love these questions. That's really exciting. You guys have good questions. The anthropomorphizing is really important to me, and that's like an edge in my work for a long time. And it's kind of like how I feel about science. Like, I love working with scientists. I feel like science is so important. And I'm thinking about science in terms of the scientific method. Having an idea and doing everything you can to prove yourself wrong and only having that be. But like we all know in this room that like science, and I don't want to be too critical of the science in this moment where it is on the chopping block, you know what I mean? Because it's like a really great tool that we've had, but like we all know the way that it co-opts other methodologies for thinking and knowing and seeing, and can go way too far with that, where you're like, you just spent a lot of money proving what we know. We know dogs make us feel better. You know what I mean? We know.
Yeah.
And that has just recently happened, and there is a book that came out maybe 2 years ago where it's being talked about like, yeah, we were kind of wrong about anthropomorphizing. Like we took that way too far. Like animals have emotions. They have a lot, like most of the same emotions that we have, maybe not to the same extent, maybe not to the same expressions, but actually like more similar than not. And if we're getting that, like it's actually the separation that we didn't. But I think we also have to like not put too much on them. And I definitely think there are moments where anthropomorphizing these, and being like it reaches out. But there's also these moments where it does, like and that like it kind of just comes back. And I think it's in the service of giving people an opportunity to see them. And I'm not a scientist, so you know what I mean. I can do that, but I just think we have to have both. And like I think this like just in the arts, just like with the arts for so long, I spent so much time answering the question, if you want to save the world, why are you in art school? You know what I mean? And like and that's so didactic, and then 10, 15 20 years later, that's now in the zeitgeist, and I think the most relevant minds are addressing those. I think also, like, you can't anthropomorphize, you know, like, you're actually doing a disservice, and there's, like, a truth to that, but we go too far, you know?
Yeah.
And, like, finding spaces where the pendulum,
Yeah.
yeah.
I had an interesting conversation the other day with one of our authors who's a bee scientist, and he was saying about the new book, Zoe Schlesinger, I think I'm saying that right, so The Light Eaters, which is about the intelligence of plants. And he's like, that book has been so important because it's opening up a conversation that had been closed. And he was just thrilled about that. And I found that really, really interesting to hear from someone who is at Cal Berkeley with a lab looking at bees.
Even when the conversation is problematic, like the term Anthropocene, like it's a problematic term that's brought up all these problematic things, you know what I mean? But I'm glad we're talking about the problems, and it gave a vessel to like point to like talk about the problems with the term, you know what I mean?
I was thinking, I'll just ask this last question, and then we can stand up if we feel like it. But I also love that we also, one of the goals in sitting down was to be level with the plants, with the plant bodies, so we're all on the same level. But one of the things you were sharing with me was about how if you look at some of these plant bodies, you have these like breakages and openings, and they're very sometimes vaginal or wounded looking. And you can even see like some of the damage here. And so I just wanted to invite you to speak and invite everyone else maybe to also join in. Like, how are you cultivating or practicing seepage and breaking cracks?
Yeah. Well, that leads in perfectly. So you see the little seedlings, which if we feel like, because these are probably not going to grow that much more in here, we could try and plant these in the cracks of the sidewalk today. I don't have tools to do that, but we can improvise. But there will be another event that will be a walking tour of the cracks in the sidewalk, and I'm inviting other thinkers to think about that question, like in this moment in particular. You know, because I definitely, like, when we were planning the show, I was like, oh my god, if Trump gets elected, is this going to feel totally irrelevant, like making this work about plants? And like somehow it didn't, and I'm very self-critical on those things, but like actually just cultivating this care in these moments felt really important. So we're inviting folks to think about the soft power that can be cultivated in spaces and exploit the cracks in large power systems and like pavement, you know what I mean, that seem impenetrable, and how we can together. And so if you want to come on the walk and you want to spend 2 to 5 minutes, you know, at a crack talking about your way of doing that or your interpretation of that, or seepage, the outer sunset, that is all on an aquifer. And you guys know that and it's sand, so it really, we could be really recharging, we could really be using that. I know that from Jug Jacuzzi, who's the gynecology garden, but like that's all paved over. So anyhow, if you guys want to come back or talk more, think more about those cracks.
I think that, when I think about the soft power, we have a little insect visitor who seems to like it here. I think it might be a cucumber bug.
I love that you knew that.
I'm just guessing. I just think it's got some dots and it's green. But I think obviously a lot about how art and literature and our relationships that we build through these things have the power to shift culture, and that's, you know, and that can be for good or ill. Like culture can swing, but I do hope that we can keep building that and keep trying to take work like this that imagines new ways of relating or restored ways of relating to plants, and be inspired by the power of the art that you're making around that to try and practice that in our own lives. And I think that that's one of the things that people coming to a show like this or looking at the pictures and hearing the sounds, I I think it's really important to remember that we have the possibility to do that. And I'm really grateful for artists who help us see possibilities that we didn't before. So that's very much what I see your work doing.
Thank you so much.
It's
Thank you.